Hey folks, welcome back to the Wikipedia world, and I am Abhinay Gupta. And today we start with a fresh new topic, right? We start with a new chapter which is the prevention of oppression and mismanagement. So as the name suggests, right, this is a chapter defending certain rights, definitely, right? So this chapter, the sections that we are going to refer to in this chapter, right, basically consisting of section 397 to 409 from the Companies Act 1956. Right? So yeah, we have certain new sections in this chapter that we'll refer to from the Companies Act 2013. But if you pick up the study material, right, from your institute as well, so for which is applicable for 2017 May attempt, you still find Companies Act 1956 referred to it, right? So we'll be going ahead with the same, but there are certain new sections from 2013 that has come up. I'll refer to those as well, right? So let us begin with this chapter, an interesting chapter and a little different from the normal one, right? So we are not going through the limitations and all those things, right? We are going to talk some sense, some logic in this chapter. Prepared for it? So this chapter basically defines the majority rule, right? And if I talk to you about the crux of this chapter, right, then the Companies Act 1956, which was enacted, right, that together with the other common law which are already prevailing in the market, right, which are already prevailing, right, in the economy, in the scenario, right, they actually come forward to protect the minority at times, right? So other laws also which are focusing on the protection of the minority, they come and they make an attempt to maintain a balance between the rights of the two. It's not about overpowering the minority or leaving the majority with the power as they have, right? It is about maintaining a balance between the two. And so it is not only done by the Companies Act, it also takes help from the other common law which are already prevailing, right? So when what they do is they actually focus, if you look at it, they try to focus to limit the power of the majority, right? So there are a number of well-defined minority rights that they have brought forward just to limit the power of majority. And hence, when they're limiting the power of majority, that too in favor of the minority, they're protecting the minority shareholders. Right? So this is basically an attempt of this chapter or attempt from these sections made by the Companies Act 1956. So these sections go ahead in hand with other common law to define certain rules, right? So basically what prevails in our law is the majority rule. Wherever you see, right? So there is, in the board meeting, you have a board resolution passed. How do you pass it? You pass it by the majority rule. If you look at your general meeting, again the majority prevails for an OR, ordinary resolution. And a supermajority prevails in the case of a special resolution. So everywhere you see, even in our Indian system, the election, the worldwide election, what happens? People cast their vote and the majority vote wins. So everywhere this is a common law that the majority, whatever the majority says, prevails. But that doesn't mean, right, that if there is some injustice that occurs to the minority, then we still ignore it, right? So this chapter is just an attempt to put a little bit of restriction on the majority rule, right? So people who have been studying this subject earlier also, they must be knowing about the famous rule in Foss and Harbottle case, right? So Foss and one of the partners, right, they were into a business near Manchester. So they were dealing in some lands and stuff, right? So they bought land and they tried to build up the infrastructure on it. And what they did basically, the two directors of the company, they started selling and leasing out the land for undue benefits for themselves, right? So land which had a good value sold at a lower cost, some given to favorable things, and all those kind of things were going on. We will not get into the detail of what happened in that case, right? What was the entire scenario, because that is of no question for us. But on a nutshell, if you want to know, then okay, there was a case. Foss and the partner, they were trying to do some mischief with the property that they were dealing in Manchester, which is now actually built up huge, right? And in that case, certain minorities, right, they were suppressed. So when we say the minorities were suppressed, what we basically go ahead to do is to help them, right? But in that case, when Harbottle put up the case against them, the judgment was in favor of the majority rule. And that is why that case has been taken up as an epitome, right, as a landmark that okay, this happened, but this is what we need to avoid, right? So as per Fawcett-Harbottle rule, the will of the majority must prevail, right? But if we look into it in detail before going to the advantages, so what happens basically, what happened over there, there were two shareholders, right, who brought an action against the directors of the company, right, the directors who were taking up the fraudulent practice and the illegal transactions, right? So they misapplied, alienated and wasted the properties of the company. So these two shareholders, right, they came up with a complaint in the court, but the court dismissed the action on certain grounds. And those grounds basically formed way for the other Common Law and Companies Act to form rules, right? So that there is no more injustice, right? So on what grounds did the court deny the entire case against the Foss and Harbottle was very simple. They say that those two shareholders, they denied them to be proper plaintiff. They say you cannot file the case. Why? Because if the two directors, right, if they were doing some mischief, if they were trying to misapply the property, they were wasting the property, it was the concern of the company. So company as a separate legal entity should have been filing the case. Right? So if the company wants, please pass a resolution, file a case. I'm okay with it. But if two shareholders they come and they say we're not gonna entertain it. Right? Because they say that the damage is caused basically to the company and the company was a aggrieved party. The company could have put up the case. Right? And it cannot be brought forward by an individual shareholder. Second thing what they said on the same platform was that mere injury is not enough. Right? They said, okay, two of you are there, you are losing some of the opportunity or some of the shares on your end. That is not enough. You have to be seriously aggrieved of something. Right? A person would be aggrieved only if he is able to further establish that injury was caused due to breach of duty to them. Right? Say, okay, in day-to-day action, if there are some minor injuries, that is okay. Right? But if there is a breach in duty and something major happens, then you come into place. But again, for that also, right, the company has to come up, not you. Right? And then they also put forward a justification that we do not entertain unproductive litigations. Like if there are 1,000 shareholders in a company, right, and two shareholders come up each time and file a case against the company. Two again come and file a case against the majority, not the company. Right? Then how many cases are the court gonna entertain? Court says, listen, if you have a problem, do one thing, all of you put up a general meeting, decide whatever the majority says, please from the company's end, bring the case to me. I cannot go ahead and cater to all the cases of all the shareholders. Right? Tomorrow everybody pops up and say, hey, I was aggrieved and this happened, that happened. That is simply not done. Right? So based on these two grounds, the entire case was rejected. So okay, we're not taking it forward. It is not possible for you to claim any relief in that scenario. Right? But when we talk about the rule of Foss and Harbottle that came up, right, the majority rule, there were certain advantages to it. Right? It is a cardinal principle of the company law that the will of the majority will prevail. Right? And the main advantage of the majority rule was that first we say they get a proper plaintiff. So in this case, as the company is the proper plaintiff, with the majority rule, when you say that the shareholders should go ahead, hold a shareholders meeting, a general meeting, decide, majority vote casted in favor, okay, go ahead with the case. So they say advantage of this rule is that only the proper plaintiff will come up. Unnecessary things will not be popping up and they will not be entertained. Right? Second, they again said that unproductive litigation will be avoided. So advantage of this rule, obviously that rule had some advantage in general terms, but if there are something which are actually serious and somebody takes a disadvantage of being a majority, then in that case the minority has to be saved. Right? But if we look at it in general, okay, these are the advantages of the majority rule. And that is the reason why the majority rule is prevailing, right? If it had no advantages, we would not be following that rule. So we follow majority rule with certain limitations on it, right? So the next advantage is that it avoids unproductive litigation, as I said. Not every individual or minority would pop up and say, we want to file a case. right? Next, they avoid multiplicity of suit. One on one, one on one, one on one. Everybody comes up and they're filing the same case. They're filing the same case. See, understand, if you all have the same case, please come under a common understanding and bring me one single case, right? With a strong backup with it. And we go ahead with that, right? In the last stage, there is a recognition of the will of the majority. So there's a well accepted rule that the will of the majority will prevail. That has been followed and reaffirmed by the principle of Foss-Harbottle. These were the advantages of the rule. But if we see, there have been certain exceptions also that will take place. Right? So minority shareholders are protected by the common law, which is already prevailing, and the provisions of the Companies Act that we will be taking care of. Okay, so basically this lecture I'll not take it very much ahead, because in the next lecture will be a little long, and they will be discussing about the exceptions to the rules of Foss-Harbottle. My only concern in this lecture was to give you a brief of this rule and give you an insight of what the chapter is going to be. Right? So the chapter, basically, if I give you a crux, is going to talk about the majority rule prevailing, right? But again, the chapter highlights that the common law and the provisions of the Companies Act have come up with a lot of limitations on the majority rule, so that there is no oppression or there is no mismanagement in the company. Right? They do not want to favor any oppression of the minority as well. So this is the basic crux, right? And the Foss-Harbottle rule is the majority rule, and in the next lecture we will see the exceptions to the majority rule which is laid down in the common law, as well as the exceptions in the majority rule which is laid down in the Companies Act. Right? And after we are done with that, we'll move ahead to our major section, which starts with section 397. That is about claiming the relief. Okay, operation has happened. Now please let us know the procedure of how to claim the relief. So all this procedural part will start. But understand, to understand this procedural part also, you need to have the basic and the crux. So in the first two lectures, I'll give you the basic. So the first lecture, I'll end up over here. It'll be a short lecture for you, right? But please switch on to the next lecture where we'll be discussing about the exceptions, right? So I'll see you guys in the next lecture. Until then, this is Abhinay Gupta signing off. Thank you and bye-bye.